Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, I've been vocal. South Carolina hasn't been the program that's been in the national media in terms of what they've done in the offseason, what additions they've made in the transfer portal. Very intentful and kind of a sneaky, nice couple of additions going into the 2025 year. Now, Dill, as the dust has settled, right? Spring practice over, spring portal over. Who are the most important new faces coming into the South Carolina program? We kind of figured this out during spring practice, and we saw a lot of names really emerge as new additions that are going to contribute right away in 2025. Who are the five most important new faces to the South Carolina program? Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, Dill, we have to give a shout out to the South Carolina fans. This football program has been a blast for the fellas to talk about. The amount of South Carolina fans that have been rocking with the boys and like the dead of winter when nobody really cares about college football. We can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I think we're both coming at this kind of from the same lens. And I think to the South Carolina fans that follow this program pretty damn closely, probably agree with this take. South Carolina made a lot of really good additions. Like you can talk about Brandon Sissy coming from NC State. You can talk about Rasul Faison coming from Utah State. Really good football players, like guys that can be all SEC in 2025. Who is the most important for South Carolina to have the most success in 2025? It has to be the big bodies in the middle of the defensive line. Now, I've talked a lot of Troy Pikes. You haven't, and you like Troy Pikes more than I do. So I'll give you the T box and say, hey, sell the people on Troy Pikes going into 2025.
And I think the big thing is Troy Pikes has a little bit of the game of a Tonka Hemingway, of a TJ Sanders, where
Yeah,
he
I
does try to
agree.
get upfield a little bit more. He does try to get in the backfield. And that, again, South Carolina needs to find a way to replace that. And you like things about what Nick Barrett does and what Monkel Goodwin does, like big, tough, physical defenders
Yep.
who aren't going to get moved around a lot, aren't liabilities, and just liabilities on the field at all. You need some difference makers. And Troy Pikes, I feel like, again, we talked about him. You're like, oh, I think he's okay. You weren't in love with him. I'm like, hey, he looks awesome to me. I'm watching that Appalachian State game. I thought he was really disruptive. And then you start seeing Georgia sniffing around,
Yeah.
he's sniffing around, all
Yeah.
the big boys were sniffing around. I think there's something in his game. Probably needs to put on a little bit more weight to play consistently for
Agree
the
with that.
South Carolina team. But if they can kind of get him rolling, and he's not a super old player yet, I think he can be a real, like, again, it's going to be tough to replace what they lost in the middle, but they
Well,
need
look, that's the
gratitude.
thing is like, I don't think that the conversation shouldn't be, can we be as good as we were last year? Because you ain't. I think most South Carolina fans understand that. Now, you have the opportunity to be better on a lot of other parts of this football team going into 2025. The way I look at it, can it not be a problem? Can it hold serve against some of the best teams in the SEC? The pass rush is going to be fine. Like when you have a guy like Dylan Stewart, I ain't got no question marks about how well you can rush the passer. Can you stop the run on first and second down to set up those pass rush situations? That's the conversation. And that is probably the biggest question mark about Troy Pikes. Like physically two gap and eating some double teams. Can he do that at the SEC level? You said something really important. He's only going to be a redshirt sophomore. The kid he redshirted in 2023, took a monster jump in 2024. Does he take another monster jump in 2025? Dill, if you told me him and Gabriel Brown-Ladindi could be a really solid starting duo for South Carolina in 2025, and then you sprinkle in Monkel Goodwin, you sprinkle in Nick Barrett or a guy like Xavier Hardy, I look at this team a little bit differently than I looked at this team prior to spring practice. If Troy Pikes puts it together, like it changes the way you look at South Carolina. Number two, and this is, in my opinion, probably the best addition South Carolina made and going to be very important. One of the more frustrating parts about how South Carolina is being talked about is it's all about Lenore Sellers. And look, I get it. He has the opportunity to be legitimately the best quarterback in all of college football in 2025. I get why he gets all the attention. This team wants to run the football, and I have a sneaky kind of belief in this South Carolina offensive line, especially as you move Trey into guard, Tree Babaleta into guard. South Carolina was top 20 in the country in rush rate last year. They want to run the football, and they want to have a bell cow doing it. Rasul Faison, he probably would have been too. Sorry, I'm rambling, but I'll wrap up in a second. Promise. You could have asked me this 2 months ago, and I probably would have had Rasul Faison in the top 3 in terms of most important newcomers. I feel even more strongly about it coming out of spring. Like, one of the biggest storylines for South Carolina in spring practice, this kid is a little bit different. And within the South Carolina program, I think there's some legitimate belief that he can really take over where Rocket Sanders left off and be an all SEC caliber running back for South Carolina 2025. If you get that from Rasul Faison with an offensive line that I think can kind of be sneaky good in 2025, massive storyline for South Carolina on offense.
In a bit more of a playmaker, I think, than what you had last year with Rocket Sanders. I think his long speed is
Yes.
a bit better. I think his acceleration is a lot better. And
Here's what with the biggest disheartening. I apologize for the
no,
interruption.
you're a Faison guy. I'll let you go.
Yeah, let me cook a little bit. Rocket Sanders was really linear. Like, he could get rolling when it was time to get rolling, but it took him a little bit of time to get rolling, and he was a big body that wanted to go north and south. Rasul Faison's got a little bit more shake, but also got up to 220 pounds, so I don't really question the ability to run between the tackles in the SEC. This kid looks like an SEC running back. That extra shake, that extra ability to make people miss in tight areas that Rocket Sanders quite didn't really have. That's kind of the difference I think South Carolina fans should be looking for from this kid in 2025.
Yeah, and I just like the better ability to operate in kind of the open field in terms of making guys
Yeah,
miss. And I
agreed.
feel like the South Carolina offense, with what Lenoris can do and what this offensive line might be able to be this year, I feel like they can create some space for running backs. I look at Rasul Faison, the ability to make guys miss and then turn like big plays into home run plays.
Yep.
That's me a big one because you still probably wonder how explosive the passing attack is going to be in terms of their ability to really attack downfield consistently. So I think you'll have inherently some more explosiveness from Rasul Faison at the back spot.
How about it? What a transition from the boys going to number 3. And I'm just going to overarching the freshman wide receivers coming into this program. When I go back to December, we're talking about South Carolina portal targets. The idiot that I was banging the table, South Carolina needs to add wide receivers. It wasn't good enough in 2024. Shane Beamer sitting there and saying, y'all don't know about the freshmen that we have coming in. It was very clear. Like, Shane Beamer kind of knew the wide receivers that were coming into this program and had a lot of confidence that those guys could immediately be the difference makers in the 2025 year. The other thing we learned out of spring practice, that's the case. And so whether it's Brian Rowe Jr., whether it's a guy like Malik Clark, whether it's Donovan Murph coming in through the summer, can this wide receiver room be better for South Carolina in 2025, which still is a sneaky conversation because I didn't think the South Carolina wide receiver room was all that good last year. Like, Nick Harbor started to get it going later on in the season, but it wasn't a complete form from Nick Harbor. Like, outside of Joshua Simon at the tight end position, there wasn't a ton of trust and reliability out on the outside. Can that be better for Lenore Sellers in 2025? Because if it is, like, again, there's a lot of reason to believe this South Carolina offense takes a big step in the right direction in the 2025 year.
Because you weren't recruiting this type of talent. I mean, they're bringing in 3 or 4 guys who probably be their like kind of top tier wide receiver recruits for the last few
4 blue
years.
chippers.
I mean, this is a big time class, and I think you said it, like, with the way these younger wide receivers, and this isn't just South Carolina, but across the country, kind of come in and feel like they hit the ground running a little bit more in some other positions. I'm pretty comfortable with kind of riding your young guys. And again, you have some steady players coming back, obviously, with a guy like Nick Harbor.
Well, here's the thing. Nick Harbor, I would push. I ain't calling Nick Harbor steady. Like, I think Nick Harbor could be a shooting star in 2025. It was anything but. It was kind of a little bit of a roller coaster for Nick Harbor during the first 2 years. That's probably the biggest question for South Carolina, or one of the biggest questions. Can Nick Harbor be a true wide receiver one? Dill, I kind of peruse some 2026 NFL mock drafts just to get a sense of what the NFL thinks of some of these young cats at the college ranks. Saw Nick Harbor in some first round NFL mock drafts. Now, that might sound ludicrous as we sit right now in the middle of October. That might not sound too ludicrous. If he puts it together, he can be a legitimate wide receiver one in a way South Carolina didn't have last year. Like, they had to run that offense, that passing attack, through Joshua Simon. And if you get Nick Harbor as that true wide receiver one, and then, hey, Mazeo Bennett, kind of be a complementary piece, Jared Brown, we can kind of phase in the freshmen as they get more comfortable. I would think that's the recipe for South Carolina in 2025. Number 4, Dill, our favorite, Boaz Stanley coming from Troy. I'll be the first one to admit this. When I saw Boaz Stanley commit to South Carolina, and the South Carolina fans know this, who've been rocking with the fellas, I was like, who? You know what now? Love the name. Don't know much about the player. You go back and watch him a little bit. Wasn't great at tackle for Troy. Not really sure why they were playing a 6'3" guy at tackle. They moved him into center halfway through the season. Much, much better. Now, the question was, can he come to the SEC level and lock it down, be that plug-and-play center? Everything we heard out of spring ball was that that's the case. And this thing that stands out to me, dude, 6'3", 325. South Carolina, in terms of the player development in the weight room, has been big time. Like, these guys are testing off the charts, gaining some big-time weight. Boaz Stanley, 325. Trevon Baugh, 340. Tree Babaleta, 340. That interior battery of the offensive line, big physical unit that has the capability to move a lot of bodies off the line of scrimmage, Boaz Stanley being the glue. He's going to be a huge piece to South Carolina in 2025.
And especially because you're returning so many guys you really like at the offensive line spot.
it.
You don't want to have a position where you're at center and you don't have a really dependable guy, because again, that can be really disruptive.
Yeah.
Like just the overall structure. So you want to bring a guy who's played some football and a guy you can kind of count on. So I look like, again, you just didn't want to waste how good this offensive line I think can be with Josiah Thompson coming back.
Agreed.
With the way he was, Cason Henry being a guy who was really coming on, I thought, towards the end of the year. You just didn't want to let that go to waste because you didn't have someone who you really felt good about at center.
And the coolest part about Boaz Stanley is when he came over from Troy, I was like, all right, kind of like plug and play, just hold down the fort, dude. Nah, don't be a liability. And now the conversation, like, hey, this kid could play like at the SEC level, which is exciting. They brought in another kid, Nolan Hay, at center. And maybe some South Carolina fans were like, what do you mean Boaz Stanley won the job? They brought in Nolan Hay. That's a depth piece addition, I believe. Because I don't think they had another center they trusted on this football team outside of Boaz Stanley. And you don't want to have Boaz Stanley miss a drive and not have a guy who can snap the football. And so I don't think Nolan Hay coming in says anything about what they think of Boaz Stanley starting for the Gamecocks in 2025. Last one on the list, though, Brandon Sissy. Leaving off Justin Okoronkwo was probably a mistake. Let's talk about Brandon Sissy. We'll also talk about Justin Okoronkwo. He's probably the second best addition South Carolina made. Outside of Rasul Faye, you could argue Brandon Sissy was the best addition. I mean, in terms of best pure football player, you have Matt 5 because, look, I think that South Carolina secondary would have been pretty damn good whether or not Brandon Sissy was on the football team. Now it gets better, no doubt, with a kid like him joining this program. Here's what I love about him. Number one, the numbers are legit. Faced 27 targets last year, only gave up 14 catches, 1 penalty. 3.6% missed tackle rate. He missed 1 tackle all year last year. Talk about boundary cornerback numbers, being forced to tackle in space, missing 1 tackle all year. Elite. Like, this kid can be an all SEC caliber dude. Here's what I love about him. Gives you a little versatility in the back end. I mean, he can play boundary because he showed us he can play boundary last year, but also played a lot of nickel going back to his freshman year, played a little nickel to start for NC State. If you feel like you want to, because there's some talk about moving the nickel back to safety and putting Sissy out at the nickel spot. At the end of the day, he's a really good football player that can be a good football player at multiple different positions. That versatility, that ability to get your 5 best football players on the field, really important. And Brandon Sissy brings that to South Carolina.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I mean, it's nothing against the player where he ranks on the most important list.
Yeah, I agree.
South Carolina had a good secondary. You don't turn Brandon Sissy down. Like, it doesn't matter if you thought your secondary was good before it. It's like, if a player that good wants to be on your team, yeah, you take a player of that caliber because he is a really, really good player.
Justin Okoronkwo. This was I am a little frustrated at myself for just like, okay, I know I was supposed to limit to 5, but like we should be talking about this kid because of the upside he brings to the table. He's about as freaky of an athlete as it gets. And Dill, one of the things that, and I know I've talked about this, so I'll keep it short. one of my biggest takeaways from South Carolina in the spring portal is they didn't even sniff at an off-ball linebacker. Now, there's not a ton of proven production in that room. In fact, it's pretty green. Like, not a guys who have played a ton of football before. But the athletic profiles are there. Shane Beamer not even sniffing at a veteran linebacker, telling me that these linebackers might have had a really – look, it's one thing to get up in front of the media and say, hey, our linebackers, we feel good about them, and then go grab 3 linebackers in the portal. Well, you probably didn't feel all that good about your backers. Shane Beamer didn't even sniff around from what I saw.
And there were, in fairness, there were some decent transfer portal linebackers. There were some positions like wide receivers. Oh, this was not a good wide receiver crew in the spring portal. Like, there were some linebackers, like you look at Taggart from BYU, that type of player.
Amari
there were
Campbell.
enough of them that I think a lot of teams. I mean, you saw Miami get active for transfer linebackers. You saw some good players moving, and South Carolina wasn't even in the sweepstakes. So again, I think that does give you some confidence that, like, of course, Fred Johnson feels like the guy who needs to take hold of that room and be the leader, if you will. But I imagine that does say a lot of good things about the other young guys on the roster.
Yeah, whether it's Sean Murphy, whether it's Justin O, feel good about it. All right, we'll pause it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Okay, one more note I'll say. South Carolina's damn good at evaluating portal additions. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these guys hit in 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.